I made one simple request to my grandson. 10 words. That's all it took for my daughter-in-law to explode and tell me I was no longer welcome in her house. What she didn't know, I'd been paying the $800 a month to live in their unheated garage. What I did next didn't just shock them, it exposed a secret that changed everything. My name is Patrick. I'm 62 years old, and this is the story of how I went from being invisible in my own family to the man they couldn't afford to lose. But here's what they never saw coming. The real power wasn't in the money I'd been giving them. It was in what I discovered they'd been hiding from me. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who should lift you up, you need to hear this. Subscribe right now and smash that bell icon, because this story has 6 chapters, and each one will leave you speechless. Drop A in the comments if you think Patrick should have stayed quiet, or A if you're ready to see him reclaim his dignity. Hit that like button if you believe standing up for yourself is never wrong. I never imagined that asking my 17-year-old grandson to step outside would cost me the only home I had left. But on that cold November evening in suburban Connecticut, 10 simple words turned my world upside down. "Derek, would you mind smoking outside? My lungs can't handle it." That's all I said. 10 words. Polite. Reasonable. Necessary. My name is Patrick, and I'm 62 years old. 18 months ago, I moved into my son Alexander's home, or more accurately, into the converted garage behind it. A bad investment had wiped out most of my retirement savings, and my son and his wife Jessica offered me a place to stay while I got back on my feet. At the time, it felt like a lifeline. Looking back now, I'm not sure what it really was. I have COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, from 30 years working construction. My lungs are scarred, fragile. Even secondhand smoke sends me into coughing fits that last hours, sometimes days. Everyone in the family knew this, or at least they were supposed to. That Sunday evening, I'd been invited to dinner at the main house. It was rare. Most nights I ate alone in my garage apartment, heating up whatever I'd bought from my weekly grocery run. But that weekend was Jessica's birthday, and Alexander had insisted I join them. "Dad, come on, it's family," he'd said. So I came. Dinner was pleasant enough. Jessica made pot roast. Their daughter Ruth, who's 12 and the kindest soul I know, told me about her science project. Derek, their older son, barely looked up from his phone. 17 years old, senior in high school, and already carrying himself like the world owed him something. After dinner, we moved to the living room. That's when Derek pulled out a cigarette and lit it right there on the couch. The smell hit me immediately, sharp, acrid, crawling into my throat. I felt the tightness in my chest starting. I knew what was coming if I didn't say something. "Derek, would you mind smoking outside? My lungs can't handle it." I kept my tone light, friendly, non-confrontational. I even smiled. Derek rolled his eyes and started to get up, muttering something under his breath. Then Jessica's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Are you serious right now, Patrick?" I turned to her, confused. "I'm sorry, what?" She set her wine glass down hard on the coffee table. "This is our house. Derek can do whatever he wants in his home. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should just stay in your apartment." The room went silent. Even Derek looked uncomfortable. I tried to explain, my voice steady despite the tightness spreading in my chest. "Jessica, I'm not trying to cause a problem. It's just my condition." "Your condition," she interrupted, making air quotes with her fingers. "Patrick, we've been walking on eggshells around you for a year and a half. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. The least you could do is not make demands about what we do in our own home." I looked at Alexander, my son, the boy I'd raised, put through college, taught to ride a bike and change a tire and treat people with respect. He sat there staring at his phone, saying nothing. "Alexander," I said quietly. He finally looked up, his face tight with discomfort. "Dad, maybe let's not make this a big thing, okay?" Something cracked inside me in that moment. Not my heart, That would be too poetic. It was something smaller, quieter. It was the last shred of belief that I still mattered to these people. I stood up slowly. I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll head back to my apartment. Jessica scoffed. Oh, don't be dramatic. But I was already walking toward the door. Ruth jumped up and followed me. Grandpa, wait. It's okay, sweetheart, I told her, forcing a smile. Grandpa's just tired. I'll see you tomorrow after school, okay? I walked out into the November cold, across the driveway, and into the garage. My apartment, 4 walls, a hot plate, a mini fridge, a bed, and a space heater that barely kept the chill out. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to control my breathing. The tightness in my chest was getting worse, but I didn't want to use my inhaler. I wanted to feel this, to remember it. Through the thin wall, I could hear voices from the main house. The window in my apartment faced their living room, and sound carried easily. Jessica's voice came through clearly. Your father is becoming a problem, Alexander. I'm done walking on eggshells. He doesn't pay rent, he doesn't contribute, and now he's trying to tell Derek what to do? My blood ran cold. Doesn't pay rent? Doesn't contribute? I stood up and walked to my desk. I pulled out a folder, the one where I kept copies of all my bank statements, all the checks I'd written. For 18 months, I'd been writing a check to Alexander for $1,800 every single month. To help with expenses, he'd said, just until you get back on your feet. $1,800 a month. For a garage with no insulation, a space heater I'd bought myself, and a mini fridge because I wasn't allowed to use their kitchen freely. I did the math in my head. $32,400. $32,400 for a garage apartment that was cold, damp, and barely habitable. I sat back down on my bed, the folder open in my lap, and I felt something shift inside me. The hurt began to calcify into something else, something harder, colder, clarity. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a burden they were tolerating. A burden who was, apparently, not even paying his way. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Richard Obed, my former brother-in-law, my late wife's brother. A retired attorney who'd told me a year ago, Patrick, if you ever need anything, call me. I mean it. I'd been too proud to call him then. I wasn't anymore. I typed out a message. Richard, I need legal advice. Can we talk tomorrow? It's about power of attorney and financial arrangements with Alexander. Please don't tell anyone yet. I hit send. Then I opened my notebook and started writing. Every repair I'd done on their house. Every time I'd mowed the lawn, fixed the fence, unclogged the gutters. Every afternoon I'd picked up Ruth from school and watched her until Jessica got home from work, or wherever she went during the day. I wrote it all down. Because if they wanted to treat this like a business arrangement, then I was going to show them exactly what kind of business we'd been doing. For 2 days, I didn't leave my apartment. Not out of hurt, though there was plenty of that, but because I was taking inventory. And what I found made me realize I'd been playing this game all wrong from the very beginning. Richard called me back within an hour of my text. We agreed to meet at a diner 20 minutes away, neutral ground where no one from the family would see us. When I walked in Tuesday morning, Richard was already in a booth, 2 coffees on the table. He stood and hugged me, and I felt something loosen in my chest. This man had been family once, before my wife Sarah passed 3 years ago. We'd drifted apart after that, the way people do when the connecting thread is gone. But when he looked at me across that table, I saw no judgment, only concern. Patrick, what's going on? I pulled out the folder. Bank statements, canceled checks, the family living agreement I'd signed when I moved in, a document Alexander had drawn up that I'd barely read because I'd trusted my own son. Richard put on his reading glasses and went through everything methodically. The longer he read, the tighter his jaw became. Finally, he set the papers down. Patrick, do you know what you signed here? A living arrangement, I said. Alexander said it was just to make things clean and legal. that I'd contribute to household expenses and, in exchange, have a place to stay. You also gave him power of attorney over your finances. My stomach dropped. What? Richard flipped to a page and pointed. There it was, in legal language I hadn't fully understood. I'd authorized Alexander to manage my pension and Social Security payments for the purpose of household financial coordination. But I'm not incapacitated, I stammered. I can manage my own money. I know that, Richard said gently. And legally, you're completely competent. This is what's called a convenience power of attorney. It's supposed to make things easier. Paying bills, managing accounts, that kind of thing. But Patrick... He paused, choosing his words carefully. All of your pension and Social Security deposits have been going directly into Alexander's household account. You've been getting an allowance of $200 a month. I felt like I'd been punched. How much am I getting total each month? Your pension is $400. Social Security is $850. That's $2,250 a month. You've been giving them $2,015. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. Can they do that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Do they have the legal right to manage your money under this POA? Yes. Are they required to use it in your best interest? Also, yes. Are they doing that? Richard shook his head. Not even close. Patrick, you're paying them more than market rate for what amounts to substandard housing, and, from what you've told me, you're providing hundreds of hours of unpaid labor and child care. He pulled out a calculator and started working through numbers. Let's be conservative. You said you watch Ruth 5 days a week, roughly 3 hours a day? Sometimes more, I said, whenever Jessica needs me. Let's say 15 hours a week. That's 60 hours a month. At a modest rate of $15 an hour for child care, that's $900 a month in labor you're providing. He kept going. Yard work, repairs, maintenance. You said you've been doing all of that? I nodded. I'd fixed their back fence, replaced boards on their deck, mowed the lawn every week, cleaned the gutters twice, fixed a leaking pipe under their kitchen sink. Another 10 hours a week, easily, I said. That's another $600 a month at minimum. Richard looked up from his calculator. Patrick, in a fair arrangement, they should be paying you. Instead, you're subsidizing their entire lifestyle. The weight of it hit me all at once. I wasn't living with family. I was an employee they didn't respect and a tenant they were overcharging. The only difference was that employees can quit. And I was about to. What can I do? I asked. Richard leaned forward. This power of attorney is revocable at any time. You're competent. You just file a revocation and it's done. Your money goes back to being your money. And the rest? The rest is harder, he admitted. You don't have a formal lease which actually works in your favor. You could leave any time. But Patrick, if you want to make a point, if you want them to understand what they've been doing, you need documentation. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a man on a mission. I photographed everything in my garage apartment, the water stains on the ceiling, the exposed wiring near the bathroom area, the lack of proper insulation, the space heaters I'd bought with my own money because there was no heat. I researched rental prices in the area. A garage apartment in decent condition rented for $500 to $600 a month. Mine wasn't in decent condition. I documented every hour of work I'd done. I went through my calendar and reconstructed weeks of child care, repairs, yard work. I was conservative. I only counted the hours I was absolutely certain about. The numbers were staggering. In 18 months, rent paid, $32,400, fair market rent for comparable space, $9,000, excess paid, $23,400, so child care provided, approximately 180 hours at 15-hour, U16-200 seed maintenance at repair work, approximately 360 hours at 20-hour, UTS-2200, total value provided, $23,400 I'd essentially broken even, if you ignored the fact that I'd been living in substandard conditions and been made to feel like a burden the entire time. During those 2 weeks, I also quietly made changes. I opened a new bank account at a different bank. Richard helped me file a revocation of power of attorney. Starting the 1st of next month, my pension and Social Security would deposit directly into my new account. I applied for senior housing in a nearby town. The waiting list was 6 months, but I got my name on it. My old friend from construction days, Obed Thomas, heard through the grapevine what was happening. He called me up. "Patrick, if you need a place to crash while you figure things out, I've got a spare room. No strings." I had options now. That changed everything. The most interesting part? Alexander and Jessica had no idea what was coming. I stopped doing the extra work. No more repairs, no more yard work. But I did it gradually enough that they just thought I was being difficult. Jessica cornered me one afternoon. "Patrick, the back gate is still broken. When are you going to fix it?" "I'm not feeling well," I said simply. "Maybe Derek could handle it." She huffed and walked away. Another day, Alexander asked why I hadn't picked up Ruth from school. "I had a doctor's appointment," I said. "Did I miss something? I thought Jessica was handling it." His face tightened with irritation, but he didn't push. They were annoyed, but they weren't suspicious. Not yet. What they didn't realize was that every small irritation, every inconvenience was teaching them something they should have already known. I'd been holding this household together in ways they'd stopped noticing. The lawn got shaggy. Small repairs piled up. Ruth came home to an empty house twice, confused and a little scared. And still, not a single thank you for the 18 months before. Just frustration that their free labor was malfunctioning. It was fascinating, in a sad way, watching them slowly realize how much I'd been doing. But even more fascinating was watching them not connect the dots. They thought I was being petty about the smoking incident. They had no idea what was really happening. On December 10th, I told Alexander I wanted to have a family meeting that Sunday. "What about?" he asked, wary. "Just some things we need to discuss," I said, "about the living arrangement. I think it's time we clear the air." He relaxed slightly, probably thinking I wanted to apologize for being difficult. I let him think that. That Sunday, I walked into their living room with my folder, my notebook, and Richard waiting in his car outside. They thought I was coming to apologize. They were very, very wrong. On December 15th, I walked into their living room and called a family meeting. They thought I wanted to apologize. I let them think that for exactly 4 minutes. It was a Sunday afternoon, cold outside but warm in their house, the kind of warmth my garage apartment never had, even with 3 space heaters running. Alexander and Jessica sat on the couch, matching expressions of patient concern on their faces. Derek slouched in the armchair, vaping something that smelled like artificial strawberries. Ruth was at her friend's house. I'd made sure of that. She didn't need to see what was about to happen. I sat down across from them, my folder and notebook on my lap. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began. "I want to talk about our living arrangement." Jessica's shoulders relaxed slightly. Alexander nodded. "Of course, Dad. We're family. We can work through anything." "I'm glad you feel that way," I said, "because I want to make sure we're all clear on what's been happening these past 18 months. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document, a printed summary I'd prepared. I slid it across the coffee table. "This is a breakdown of my financial contributions to this household since I moved in." Alexander picked it up, his brow furrowing. "Dad, what is this?" "Numbers," I said calmly. "I've been paying an $800 a month. For 18 months, that's $32,400. "You agreed to that," Jessica said quickly. "We had an arrangement." "We did," I acknowledged, "but I also did some research. Do you know what the fair market rate is for a garage apartment in this area?" Silence. "About $500 a month, maybe $600 for a nice one. Mine has water damage, exposed wiring, and no heat. So let's call it $400. That means I've been overpaying by $1,400 a month. Over 18 months, that's $25,200 in excess rent." Alexander's face had gone pale. "Dad, we never—" "Let me finish," I said, my voice still steady. "I also kept track of the other contributions I've made. Child care for Ruth. Approximately 1,080 hours at $15 an hour. That's $16,200. Maintenance, repairs, yard work, 360 hours at $20 an hour. That's $7,200. I pulled out another sheet, the one with photographs printed on it. Water stains, exposed wiring, the concrete floor with a thin rug over it. This is what I've been paying $1,800 a month to live in. Jessica stood up, her face flushed. This is ridiculous. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. You're making this sound like we were taking advantage of you. Were you not? I asked, looking directly at her. We're family, she shouted. You don't keep score in families. You're right, I said. You don't. But you also don't make family members feel like burdens. You don't explode at them for asking your son not to smoke around a medical condition. And you definitely don't tell your husband that his father doesn't pay rent when he's been paying almost $2,000 a month. Alexander's head snapped up. What? Jessica, you said— I heard you, I interrupted, looking at Jessica. Through the window, the night of your birthday. You said I was a problem, that I don't pay rent, don't contribute, and that you're done walking on eggshells. The color drained from Jessica's face. Patrick, I was angry, she said, her voice faltering. I didn't mean— Yes, you did. I stood up now, pulling out one more document. This is a revocation of power of attorney. I filed it 2 weeks ago. Starting January 1st, my pension and Social Security will deposit into my personal account, not yours. Alexander stood up too, his voice rising. Dad, you can't just— We have an agreement. An agreement you violated, I said. You took $2,050 a month from me and gave me back $200. You told me it was for household expenses. What you didn't tell me was that you were managing all of my money and deciding how much I was allowed to have. There was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it. Richard stepped inside, briefcase in hand. This is Richard Obed, I said. He's an attorney. He's reviewed all of the documents. Jessica's eyes went wide. You brought a lawyer to a family meeting? You brought a liar to a family relationship, I said. I figured we were even. Richard cleared his throat. I'm here to ensure everything is done properly. Patrick has every legal right to revoke the power of attorney. He's also well within his rights to request fair compensation for services rendered or to vacate the premises. Vacate? Alexander's voice cracked. Dad, this is your home. No, I said quietly. It's your home. I'm just the tenant you overcharged. The room fell silent. Derek had stopped vaping, staring at all of us with wide eyes. Finally, I laid out my terms. Here are your options. Option 1, I pay you $500 a month for the garage apartment. Fair market rate. I keep my own finances. We establish clear boundaries. I don't do free labor. I don't do free childcare unless we schedule it in advance and you reciprocate in some way. Option 2, I leave at the end of the month, and I expect reimbursement for the excess rent I've paid, approximately $25,000. Jessica laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. We don't have $25,000 just sitting around. Then I suggest option 1. Alexander sat back down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. Dad, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I asked. Derek, do you remember 3 weeks ago when I asked you to smoke outside? Derek shifted uncomfortably. Yeah. Do you remember what your mother said? He didn't answer. She said this was your house, that you could do what you wanted, that if I had a problem with it, I should stay in my apartment. I looked at Alexander. The apartment I was paying $800 a month for, while providing free childcare and free labor, and your wife made me feel like I was the problem for having a medical condition. Alexander's jaw tightened. Jessica, is that true? She crossed her arms. He was being dramatic. I have COPD. My voice rose for the first time. Second-hand smoke puts me in the hospital. I asked your son to step outside for 10 minutes and you told me I was making demands in your house, the house I was subsidizing. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard spoke up. You have until December 31st to decide. Patrick will be staying elsewhere until you've made your choice. If you choose option 2 and cannot pay the reimbursement, we can discuss a payment plan. Or we can discuss the housing code violations in the garage apartment and what the county might think about those. This is blackmail, Jessica hissed. No, Richard said calmly. This is negotiation. Blackmail would be if we threatened to report you without giving you options. We're giving you options. I looked at Alexander one more time. My son. The boy I'd raised to be better than this. I didn't want it to come to this, I said quietly, but you made me invisible, both of you, and I refused to disappear. I walked out, Richard following behind me. As we reached the door, I heard Alexander's voice, strained and angry. Jessica, what the hell have we done? I didn't stay to hear her answer. They chose option 1. But what happened in the 3 weeks after that meeting taught me something I never expected. Sometimes the person you're fighting isn't your real enemy. I stayed with Obed for those 3 weeks. His spare room was small but warm. Actually warm, not the artificial struggling warmth of space heaters. We drank coffee in the mornings and talked about the old days, back when we were young men with strong backs and whole lives ahead of us. You did the right thing, Obed told me one evening. A man's got to have dignity. I wanted to believe him, but late at night, alone in that spare room, I wondered if I'd just burned down the only family I had left. Alexander called twice. I didn't answer. He left voicemails saying they'd accepted my terms, that we could move forward, that he hoped we could put this behind us. Put it behind us. As if 18 months of being used and dismissed could be erased with a handshake. On January 2nd, I moved back into the garage apartment. Jessica wouldn't look at me. Alexander tried to act normal, but everything felt strained, artificial. I paid my $500 rent. I kept to myself. The house was different now. Colder, even though the heat was on. Nobody asked me to fix anything. Nobody asked me to watch Ruth. Ruth. That's where it all changed. It was January 8th, around 7 p.m. I was reading when I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, Ruth stood there in her pajamas, her eyes red from crying. Grandpa? Her voice was so small. Sweetheart, what's wrong? She burst into tears and threw her arms around me. I held her, this 12-year-old girl who I loved more than my own life, and felt my heart crack open. Did I do something wrong? She sobbed. Mom says you don't want to spend time with me anymore. She says you're mad at us. I pulled back and looked at her tear-stained face. Ruth, no, sweetheart. I love spending time with you. I'm not mad at you at all. Then why won't you watch me after school anymore? Why don't you come to dinner? I guided her inside and sat her down on my bed. How do you explain adult dysfunction to a child? How do you tell her that her parents have been using you without making her feel like it's her fault? Ruth, your mom and I had a disagreement. It's between adults. It has nothing to do with you. But everything's different now, she said. Mom and Dad fight all the time. Dad sleeps on the couch some nights, and Mom cries when she thinks no one's listening. That stopped me cold. Your mom cries? Ruth nodded. She's been really stressed. She lost her job a while ago. She didn't tell anyone, but I heard her on the phone with Grandma. She's been looking for new work, but nothing's good enough. The world tilted slightly. When did she lose her job? I don't know. Like summer, maybe. Before school started. 8 months ago. Maybe longer. Suddenly, pieces I hadn't wanted to see started fitting together. Jessica's anger, her defensiveness, the way she'd lashed out about the smoking incident, not because she didn't care about my health, but because she was drowning, and I'd represented one more thing she couldn't control. Ruth, does your dad know? I think so now. But Mom didn't tell him for a long time. She was embarrassed. After Ruth left, after I'd assured her a dozen times that I loved her and wasn't going anywhere, I sat in my apartment and stared at the wall. Jessica had been out of work for 8 months. They'd been living on Alexander's income alone. My $1,800 a month hadn't been greed. It had been survival. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I went through my records again, but this time I looked at their expenses, not mine. I thought about the mortgage on a house like theirs in this neighborhood, the 2 cars, Derek's college applications coming up, Ruth's school expenses. I pulled out my calculator and started running numbers. If Jessica had been making around $60,000 a year, which seemed right for her marketing job, then losing that income would have created a $5,000 monthly shortfall. My $1,800 hadn't filled that gap. It had only made it survivable. And when I'd reduced my payment to $500, I'd just created a $1,300 monthly hole they couldn't fill. I sat there for a long time, thinking about pride, about how it makes people do ugly things, about how I knew that better than anyone. 3 days later, I asked Jessica to meet me at a coffee shop, just the 2 of us. She came, but she was armored, defensive. She sat across from me with her arms crossed, her jaw tight. I slid an envelope across the table before either of us could speak. "What's this?" she asked, not touching it. "Open it." She did. Inside was a check for $10,000. Her face went white. "Patrick, I don't understand." "It's a loan," I said. "No interest. You pay me back $200 a month for 4 years. Consider the first payment my rent for January." She stared at the check like it might bite her. "Why would you? After everything." "Ruth told me you lost your job." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink them back, but they spilled over anyway. "I didn't want anyone to know. I was so ashamed. We were supposed to be taking care of you, and we couldn't even take care of ourselves." "So, you took care of yourselves the only way you knew how," I said. "You used my money, and you convinced yourselves it was fair." "It wasn't fair," she whispered. "I know it wasn't. But Patrick, we were drowning. When you moved in, when you offered to contribute, it saved us. And then it became easy to just take more, to justify it, to tell ourselves you owed us for giving you a place to stay." "You made me feel like nothing," I said quietly. "I know." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry. I was so scared and I took it out on you. The smoking thing. God, I wasn't even thinking about your health. I was just so tired of feeling like we couldn't do anything right. And there you were, one more person telling us we were failing." We sat in silence for a moment. "Take the check," I said. "Pay your mortgage, get caught up, find a new job. And when you're stable again, we'll talk about what fair actually looks like." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because someone did it for me once. When I was young and stupid and drowning, someone gave me a hand instead of letting me sink." I looked at her directly. "But Jessica, if you ever make me feel small again, I'm gone. Not because I hate you, but because I've learned that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "I'll do better, I promise, and I'll make Alexander do better too. Tell Derek to smoke outside, not for me, for himself, but also for me." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I will." As I walked out of that coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but something close to peace. They weren't villains. They were just people, scared and proud and flawed. Like me. Maybe that was enough to build on. Patrick just did something that will either save his family or prove he's too forgiving for his own good. Subscribe right now, because next chapter reveal whether Jessica keeps her promise, or if Patrick's kindness was the biggest mistake of his life. Comment if Patrick's too soft, or if this is what real strength looks like. Hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We're at 1,200 subscribers and climbing. Let's hit 2,000 before the final chapters drop. The ending will shock you. 6 months later, I was still in that garage apartment, but everything else had changed. Not because they changed, though they did, but because I changed first. The transformation happened slowly, in small moments that built on each other like bricks in a wall. Jessica found a new job in March. Not quite at her old salary, but stable, with benefits. The first thing she did was insist on renovating the garage apartment properly. Not out of obligation, but because, as she put it, "You deserve better than what we gave you, Patrick." We split the costs 50-50. I paid for materials. Alexander and I did most of the labor ourselves. It took 6 weekends, but by mid-April I had insulation, proper heating, and a small bathroom with a real shower. The exposed wiring was fixed. The water damage was repaired. It wasn't a palace, but it was mine. Truly mine. Derek graduated high school in June. At his graduation party, I watched him step outside automatically when he wanted to smoke. He caught my eye through the window and gave me a small nod. No words, just acknowledgement. Sometimes that's all you need. But the real change happened in the small, everyday moments. Ruth started coming over after school again, but now it was scheduled. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3 to 6 p.m. Jessica paid me $15 an hour, and, more importantly, she said thank you every single time. Ruth and I would do homework together, then watch cooking shows and try to recreate the recipes on my hot plate. We laughed more than we cooked successfully, but those afternoons became the highlight of my week. Alexander and I started having dinner together every Wednesday night. Just the two of us at a local diner halfway between his work and home. At first, the conversations were stilted, careful. We talked about sports, weather, surface things, but gradually we went deeper. One night in May, he finally said what I'd been waiting months to hear. "Dad, I'm sorry." I looked up from my coffee. "For what, specifically?" He flinched at that. I wasn't going to make it easy. He didn't deserve easy. "For all of it," he said. "For letting Jessica talk me into the power of attorney arrangement. For taking your money and convincing myself it was fair. For staying silent when she disrespected you. For being a coward." His voice cracked. "For forgetting that you're my father, not just a problem to manage." I sat with that for a moment. Apologies are easy. Change is hard. "Are you different now?" I asked. "Or are you just sorry you got caught?" "Both," he said honestly. "At first, I was just angry that you'd embarrassed us. But then I saw what we'd done. Really saw it. Dad, we turned you into hired help. We took your dignity and told ourselves we were doing you a favor." "Yes," I said, "you did. I want to be different. I am being different. I'm trying." "I know," I said. "I see it." And I did. He'd started doing the yard work himself. He'd taken over school pickups for Ruth on the days I wasn't scheduled. He asked my opinion on things again, not as a formality, but because he actually wanted to hear what I thought. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The biggest test came in July. I got a call from the senior housing complex. An apartment had opened up. 1 bedroom, ground floor, fully accessible. The waiting list had moved faster than expected. "Mr. Patrick, we need to know by Friday if you're accepting," the woman on the phone said. I stood in my renovated garage apartment, looking around at the space I'd helped build. I thought about Ruth's laughter on Tuesday afternoons, about Wednesday night dinners with Alexander, about the small nods Derek gave me when he saw me, about Jessica, who now stopped by once a week just to talk, no agenda, no tension. I thought about the man I'd been 6 months ago, invisible, diminished, convinced I was a burden. And I thought about the man I was now, someone who'd learned that boundaries weren't walls. They were bridges. You couldn't connect with people honestly until you'd established where you ended and they began. Friday morning, I called the senior housing complex back. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm going to pass. I've found a place that works for me." That evening, I told Alexander and Jessica my decision over dinner at the main house. It was the first time I'd eaten there since that November night 8 months ago. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Patrick, you're staying?" "On one condition," I said. We're rewriting that family living agreement. This time, Richard reviews it. This time, everything is clear. Fair rent, fair boundaries, fair respect. Done, Alexander said immediately. And one more thing, I added. This isn't charity. This isn't you doing me a favor. This is me choosing to stay because I want to. Because this is my family. But the moment any of you make me feel small again, I'm gone. I have options now. That's the difference. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You'll never feel small here again. I promise. I squeezed back. I'm going to hold you to that. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sat on my bed and thought about the journey, about how close I'd come to disappearing, about how asking a 17-year-old not to smoke had somehow saved my life. Sometimes you have to burn something down to rebuild it properly. Sometimes the people who hurt you aren't villains. They're just scared humans who forgot to see you as human too. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay, not because you have to, but because you choose to. I chose to stay. But this time, I stayed as Patrick. Not as a burden, not as free labor, not as someone to be tolerated, as a man who knew his worth. 3 months later, on an October evening, I was sitting on my small porch. Yes, they'd built me a porch, when Derek came outside with 2 beers. "Can I join you?" he asked. "Sure." He sat down, handed me a beer, and we drank in comfortable silence for a moment. The kid who'd rolled his eyes at me a year ago now looked different, older, maybe a little wiser. "I got into state," he said. "Full ride, engineering program." "That's incredible, Derek. Congratulations." "Thanks." He paused. "I wanted to tell you, I quit smoking. 3 weeks clean." I looked at him. "What made you decide?" "Mom told me everything. About what happened last year, about what you went through, and I realized I was part of the problem, not because I smoked, but because I didn't care that it hurt you." He took a sip of his beer. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." Grandpa. He hadn't called me that in years. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "You taught me something," he continued, "about standing up for yourself, about not letting people treat you like you don't matter. I want to be more like that." "You will be," I said. "You already are." We sat there as the sun set, grandfather and grandson rebuilding something that had almost been lost. The final test came 2 weeks later. Ruth had a school play. Jessica called me Tuesday afternoon. "Patrick, I know it's your night with Ruth, but I need to work late. Can you keep her until 8? And drive her to rehearsal at 6? A year ago, I would have said yes automatically. I would have rearranged everything, inconvenienced myself, and felt guilty for even thinking about saying no. Now, I said, I have plans at 7, but I can keep her until 6:30 and take her to rehearsal. You'll need to pick her up." "Oh, okay. Yeah, that works. Thanks, Patrick." No guilt trip, no sighing, no passive-aggressive comments, just acceptance. That's when I knew we'd actually made it. The night of Ruth's play, the whole family sat together. Me, Alexander, Jessica, Derek, and Obed, who'd become an honorary family member. Ruth played a talking tree. She was magnificent. Afterward, at dinner, Jessica raised her glass. "To Patrick, for teaching us what family really means." "And what's that?" I asked. "Respect," she said. "Not obligation, not guilt, just respect." We clinked glasses. Later, walking back to my apartment, Alexander caught up with me. "Dad, I need to tell you something." My heart clenched. Here it comes, I thought, the other shoe dropping. "What is it?" "I'm proud of you, for what you did, for standing up to us. I know it wasn't easy, but you saved this family. You saved me." I stopped walking and looked at my son. "You saved yourself, Alexander. I just showed you it was possible." He hugged me then, a real hug, not the obligatory kind. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I'm going to do better, Dad. Every day. I know you will." That night, alone in my warm, properly built apartment, I wrote in my journal, something I'd started doing after everything happened. I'm 63 now. I live in a garage apartment that's warmer than most houses. I pay fair rent. I do work I choose to do. I spend time with people who see me. Not as a burden, not as free labor, as Patrick. I asked my grandson not to smoke. His mother exploded. And that explosion saved my life, because it forced me to see what I'd been accepting, what I'd been settling for. Dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you claim, and once you claim it, everything changes. I closed the journal and looked out my window at the main house. Lights were on. I could see shadows moving inside, my family living their lives. And I was part of it. Not hovering on the edges, not invisible, not diminished. Just Patrick, the man who refused to disappear. The grandfather who taught his family what respect actually means. The father who showed his son that love without boundaries isn't love at all. I smiled and turned off the light. Tomorrow, Ruth and I were making lasagna. Wednesday, Alexander and I had dinner. Saturday, Jessica and I were going to a farmer's market. Her idea. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was more than enough. Patrick's story isn't just his. It's for everyone who's ever been made to feel invisible. If this story moved you, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. Drop a comment telling me, what's one boundary you're setting this week? Let's build a community of people who refuse to shrink. Hit that like button if you believe dignity is non-negotiable. If you believe family means respect, not obligation. If you believe standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Patrick went from invisible to invaluable. Not because his family suddenly became perfect, but because he refused to accept anything less than what he deserved. Your turn. What are you accepting that you shouldn't? Comment below. Let's talk about it. Thanks for being on this journey with Patrick. Subscribe for more real stories about families, boundaries, and the courage it takes to choose yourself. Remember, you matter. Your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. Never forget that.